Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby here with Bill Groom, Emmy-nominated production designer for The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Congratulations on your latest nomination, Bill. Very well deserved here.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, and you're nominated for the episode Susan, uh, which details it goes through a lot of these industrial musicals, is a huge part of this episode.
Yeah.
Uh, it's very fanciful. They have a great aesthetic. Where did you first go, for research and inspiration for those?
Well, there's a book, and I don't recall the name of it. There's a book on industrials that covers all of that. And then we saw a couple of uh, film clips of industrials from the past and so on and so forth, and based it on that, what we could read and see in photos and film.
Yeah. And this is a bit different. I mean, music has always been a major part of this series, but these are actually they're
Yes.
performing musical numbers on these
Yes.
sets, so
Yeah.
it's even elevated a bit more. How did that change? The process of creating a theatrical set, it's viewed from one angle. How did that change your process?
Well, it's pretty much the same. I mean, it starts. I always say, this whole thing is kind of the same regardless of the uh, nature of the project or whatever. You decide what you need to do, and then you do it. So in this particular case, we had a couple of stages the size of a Broadway stage on each end of the hall that we created for the industrials. And then, of course, we had booths along the sides and in the center, and then these big proscenium stages on each end. This particular one, we had moving elements that moved in and out and from upstage, downstage, and it was fun. And people, while we were shooting it, people were like, "We should really put this on Broadway. This belongs on Broadway." But that didn't happen. And
Maybe
but
one day, maybe there were.
it was a big. I suppose I chose that episode because it was probably the largest amount of work we did all season. We did a couple of sort of home base sets for the season, the Gordon Ford office, and those were big sets. But this, as you say, was different kind of thing than we normally do. We also did a TV sitcom this season, not in that episode, but yeah. So we did a few different things this season.
There's always a lot of design going on. I was really obsessed with the giant trash heap that Emily Burgle
Yes.
sits atop as sort of queen of garbage, like a giant throne there. That seems like it would be so much fun to pick out all the odds and ends that would go into that. What was that process like?
Well, we had a big pile of trash to play with, and we had a drawing of what it should end up looking like. And our painters did a great job, and it was all permanently affixed to this armature that we built, and that was all on a wagon, a theatrical wagon that would move upstage, downstage, and back again, and it was motorized. And that we just had fun gluing things on that pile of trash.
Yeah.
And we add when you're doing something like that, you want you always see you want a little more of this over here and maybe less of that and one of these in this particular place. So I checked in with the painters as they were building that, and then the whole thing was kind of painted, and so it had areas that were highlighted and areas that were darker and all of that. So that was fun.
And there are sort of platforms built into that because you of course have choreography happening on these
That's
sets.
right. Yeah.
So does that add an extra layer? Do you have to meet beforehand to make sure there's enough room for dance sequences?
And yes, and we met with Marguerite on that of what she needed and where those platforms would be, and yeah, that's part of the design.
Yeah, and so much it must feel like a bit of a departure from your normal work on Mrs. Maisel, because there's a lot of very period accurate designs on this show, and then these musicals are a chance to maybe be a little bit more fanciful. What was it like, kind of stepping into a new realm?
Well, the music inspires that a lot, and Curtis and Tom, our composers, did a great job, I think, on that. And yeah, I mean that's a bit of an inspiration, and of course, again, working with our choreographer Marguerite, the trash can dance and all of that. That's just a lot of fun. And almost everybody, so many of the designers who work in film and television in New York that I know came out of the theater. And my experience is that in LA, it's more people who came from film into television, New York from the theater into television and film. And so there's a little bit of different training that you bring to it in New York, or you find that people bring to it. And that's most of that's a part of it. Most of the designers who work in television and film in New York have designed stage plays and are familiar with the vocabulary of that, which is a little different than film and television.
Well, I guess it's sort of appropriate because we mentioned choreography before. The camera does an awful lot of choreography in the show around your sets with these infamous Maisel one takes. So well, when you get
that's Amy Sherman Palladino, who loves moving the camera. I've told her that she's never seen a 360-degree angle she didn't like. It's she loves to go around a room with the camera, and we design with that in mind almost every set. So we had four walls in that big hall that we created.
When you get a script and you have the space, the description of the space in front of you, do you have to plan with her from very early stages, building in paths for a camera? What is that process?
Yeah, there was a little of that on this. We had a kind of a sky cam that was on cables, and we had to make room for the rigging for that in the set, so it could come into the set and go around the little landscape set and out again. So there's that, and we work with Amy and our DP David Mullen and Alex and the grips and electricians, and it's one of the sort of greatest things about this kind of work. It's very collaborative, and because you're always, I mean, on a series, you're kind of working with the same people through the years, and that you develop a kind of shorthand with that. But on projects where you go from one project to another, it's interesting. It's always interesting to me that it's always a little different because it's a different group of people doing it, and that's one of the great things I think about this work.
There's always such really, I think, beautifully detailed sets on this show that are really evocative of the period. Like this season, I loved the scene that takes place in the automat because it feels so different from our time. How often are you finding a space like and dressing it up versus constructing a space on this show?
Well, for that particular set, we found a large space that was once a department store. It's now a church in Bed-Stuy, somewhere in that area. And as it turns out, we used very little of the walls in that space. We did a little painting on columns in the walls, but we pretty much brought a whole set in for that. So we built that automat. And our set decoration department found the little windows, the little vending cubes that, and they were the real thing from the period. And we built that into the walls of the set. And that was that episode, as I recall, was just crazy. It was crammed full of everything. And it was a long episode. I believe it was episode 9 that was in. And we had so little time to do everything. And it was, I remember being at that location at midnight, seeing it finished before we were there at 7 o'clock the next morning.
Mm. Well, you're saying that's crammed full of everything, and that Trash Heap too in the musicals was crammed full of a lot of things. How do you know when you're done with a set? How do you know it when it this is what it needs to be? Let's stop working.
I've always said that the things that don't work is when enough hasn't been done or when too much has been done. And I think it's just finding the right moment when it's finished. I often tell crews that I've never worked with before, just so you know, when you think you're finished, you're not. I will kind of go in and add things that I've had in my mind all along. And if there's time to do it, I'll ask for it. But I won't burden people with it if it's going to cause them to be stressed out on the work that needs to be done. So there's a level that you can get to, but then there's a little more that you might have in mind. And usually we get to that. Yeah.
Was there anything this season where something the perfect element was added right at the last minute because you needed that one more thing?
Oh gosh, I can't think of that. I mean, one thing that we did in the Gordon Ford office, you could see out the windows, and one of the things that I added last, I think, were flags hanging outside the windows, blowing in the breeze, and we had to have air on that. And I had thought of that all along. We could have lived without it, but in a couple of shots, you see them blowing outside the windows, which is true at Rockefeller Center. And I first started my professional work in New York at Rockefeller Center, and so I was familiar with it. And we did that, and it's just that's a little detail that just adds a little bit. It probably wouldn't be missed if it wasn't there, but it just adds a little life to the set.
Yeah. Detail is always good.
I always have that kind of thing in my mind as we're working on the set. If we get to it, we'll do this, but I try not to burden other people with the worries about that until we have the time to do it. And it's so I kind of tell my crew never relax, until we're finished with the camera rolls.
And since you brought it up earlier, I would love to know a little bit about that sitcom you had to create. There's a really beautiful black and white classic sitcom with Sutton Foster and Hank Azaria. What was that like creating for black and white in this day and age?
Well, I actually, for that episode, I ordered a little viewfinder that DPs use sometimes, and it sort of converts color to black and white. Not quite. It's that's what its claim is, but I used it on the set as we were building it, and we painted it in color and all of that as the sets were done, but in the color range that they were often done in, which was an almost more neutral color range. But I carried that little viewfinder around to look very professional as I was doing the black and white set, but I don't think it helped very much. But it helped my image. So
well, the final product turned out great, so it must have helped somewhat, at least.
It's an indie filter of some kind, and I'm not sure exactly what it's called. I still have it in my office. I'll probably never use it again. So maybe.
Well, you have received a nomination, I think, for every season of this show. It's been a good run. What does that feel like to get recognized each time?
Well, it's kind of great. I didn't think we were nominated in the first season. I felt the timing was off, but I went back and looked at it, and yes, and then the competition in that category is so strong. I mean, there's such great shows. I think the first year we lost to Chernobyl, One year we lost, I think, to The Crown. We may have lost to Game of Thrones. It's an odd category. It's an odd show because there's no real category for it. It's a 1 hour comedy as opposed to a half-hour comedy. And it's a period comedy, which many of them are not. So it is in the 1 hour period and fantasy single camera, I believe, category. So we're always up against these huge shows. And I'm honored by that, truth is. I mean, people say that when they are nominated, but it's the truth. I mean, it's an honor to be in a category with those other nominees. So that's been great. Five nominations for the show.
Well, and I think, it is, Mrs. Maisel is a fittingly huge show to stand alongside them. I think people love diving into this world. Now that we've had to say goodbye to the show and you've had to say goodbye to this work, what's kind of the biggest memories that you're keeping with you as you go forward? What will you miss the most?
Well, I think just the camaraderie of the team. It was just such a great team, this show. And I don't mean my team in the art department, but every department. And we, in the first season, developed, as I said, this kind of shorthand. And at some point, we didn't even have to talk very much. I mean, we'd get the script and we would all kind of approach it in our Maisel way. And it just almost always worked. And I think it's rare to find that. And that's probably what will be missed the most in that. And also just the great writing that Amy and Dan did, and the opportunity to do these various things, and it was great.
Well, it all came together really, really well, and was a great success on the screen. So thank you for walking me through a little bit of the design here. Everyone who's out there watching, make sure you subscribe to Gold Derby. And Bill, congrats again on your nomination. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yes, thank you.